All right, now that you've finished assignment 6C2, you're going to walk into class tomorrow and you're going to have to reproduce as much of this as possible. Like I've always been saying, it's just really good to have your multiplication tables memorized so that you can do higher level things. And the more you have memorized, the better, the easier, just the more brain power you're going to have left over for doing other things with that. So, you're going to see the normal stuff. You've seen the formula pi, sine s, cosine of s, the sketch the graphs of sine. And I also want you to include, so after you sketch sine graph, I want you to include its reciprocal pair. What is its reciprocal pair? I hope you have that memorized, and then I hope you can also draw the kissing u's. Cosine and what's its reciprocal pair? Here, draw a cosine here, and then draw its reciprocal and name it here. Tangent, oh, I don't have the thing for the tangent graph. Maybe you'll see that next. What is tangent defined as? You'll see that there. You've got the normal unit circle. And so what it's going to look like is this. How much from this can you do from memory? Kissing U's, unit circle, and cosecant, secant, tangent equals sine over cosine. All right. Cotangent would be cosine over sine, and that would also be something good to have memorized. Because we're going to use it in section 6.33. The other basic circular functions, day 3. So we know that here, we go along here, what you basically have is a right triangle, and that right triangle is going to satisfy the Pythagorean theorem. You know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and you know that v squared plus u squared is equal to 1. It's got to satisfy, it's a right triangle. So this is the three parts, the three sides of a right triangle. Now, we know that v is equal to sine and u is equivalent to cosine. So for any value s, like you can put any real number you want in for s, square the sine function and square the cosine function, you get equal 1. I want you to know that this is how you write sine s times itself twice. You put the 2 not in front of the not on the s here, but you put it on the n of sine and the s of cosine. This is how we universally write sine of s times itself. That's what this exponent means right here. You could also equivalently write sine of s inside parentheses, and then outside of the parentheses you could put an exponent. That would work, but this kind of thing is written so often that people came up with this notation to avoid having to write those parentheses. So this is a true identity. It's true for all values of s. It's always going to be true. You could even like type it into the calculator and confirm that you pick your favorite number s and put it into this side. You should get 1 out if you enter it into the calculator correctly. Now, if this is true, there's actually some things you can do with it. This should be something that you need to have memorized. Sine squared of s plus cosine squared of s is equal to 1. We'll practice it, and then after you practice it, it'll be a bit easier to memorize, hopefully. You can, for example, divide all the terms on both sides by sine squared s. Here's a fun trick. So sine squared s, cosine squared s is equal to 1. Divide all 3 of those terms by sine squared s. These cancel out. You get 1. And then here you get cotangent squared of s, because that's what cotangent is, cosine over sine. And then here, this is the reciprocal of sine squared s. So here is another identity. This is true for all values of s, and it's a statement. You don't, maybe at this stage you don't have to have this one memorized because you can get it from the first one. But I know if people who are taking the AP calculus test, this is the kind of thing they would memorize. Divide by cosine squared s. You could take that same trig identity that we had earlier, the Pythagorean theorem identity, the Pythagorean identity, and you could divide all the terms on both sides by cosine squared. This becomes, oops, not cotangent. All right, there we go, fixed. So sine squared s over cosine squared s is tan squared s. That's just how it's defined. Sine over cosine is tan. So 2 sines multiplied by each other in the numerator over 2 cosines multiplied each other in the denominator is equal to tangent multiplied by itself, plus these cancel out, and that's 1 equals 1 over cosine squared s, that the reciprocal of cosine is secant squared. Lastly, if you wanted to, you could solve for sine squared. So subtracting cosine squared from both sides and taking the square root of both sides, you could get plus sine squared s is equal to plus or minus square root of 1 minus cosine squared. You're just solving like if this were just a variable all on its own. You could try and get sine squared s by itself, and this is what you get. Or do the same thing for cosine. Cosine squared s is equal to 1 minus sine squared s. So that would mean that cosine s is equal to plus or minus, what do you think? I want you to tell me. All right, so that's just some fun algebraic manipulations you can do. You don't have to have these memorized, but if you have this memorized, you can get the others. Let's see. Complete this table of values. Do not use trig calculator keys. This is kind of an odd way of talking about what you should do, or like restricting your ability. Sometimes you tell you, okay, don't use a calculator, but now they're telling you don't use specific calculator keys, although you can use others. Don't use the trig calculator. Don't take the sine of anything, or the cosine of anything, or the tangent of anything. Instead, you are allowed to use division. You are allowed to use the reciprocal button. So if they give you if they give you this, if they ask what is sine of pi over 3, we've got that memorized. Cosine of pi over 3, we've got that memorized. Or you could draw a 30, 60, 90 triangle on a unit circle and figure it out. But then we can take the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of sine 0.87 was to be 1 over 0.87. You get this, 1.15. The reciprocal of 0.5 is 1 over 0.5, which is equal to 2. You can use a calculator for that. And then in order to get tangent, you can take the value for sine and divide by the value for cosine and get an answer there, and take its reciprocal to get cotangent. So we don't have a special triangle for this, so you can take, so they give you these two, you don't have to try and draw some sort of special triangle. Take its reciprocal, you get this, like 1 divided by this is this, 1 divided by this is this, and then the green divided by the purple is the orange, and then the reciprocal of the orange is this one right here. That's how you can use a calculator to do that. All right, so next, given that cosine s is equal to 1/5, and that s is in the 4th quadrant, find the other function values. All right, so we know that cosine is this, and we want to find, we're going to have to figure out if we know cosine, we've got to figure out what sine is. And we can use this formula right here that we just got here. We can use the sine form, that formula. You can see we're plugging in 1/5 in here, and we get sine of s is equal to plus or minus square root of 1 minus 1/5 squared. Calculate that out, you get plus or minus 0.98. So you got to figure out, is it going to be the plus or the minus? We've got the choice, but then they tell us that they want the one, whichever one of these that's in the 4th quadrant. So let's draw a handy dandy unit circle. We go around, we see that we can plot the point, 1/5 comma 0.9 plus 0.98 or minus 0.98. So 1/5 plus 0.9 would be this one right here, right there, and then 1/5 comma negative 0.98 is down here, and they want it in the 4th quadrant. So that's the answer that they want, not the other one. So now that we have the u coordinate and the v coordinate, we can divide the two, and we can get the tangent coordinate and cotangent and all of those. It just keeps on going from there. Once we know exactly where it is in the unit circle, then we do all the rest to find out. Same thing here. If you know sine, they want you to find cosine in the 3rd quadrant. So let's find cosine. Find s in the 3rd quadrant. So cosine of s is equal to plus or minus. We take that fraction that they give us and we put it in here, 1 minus this squared, and then plus or minus. We got to figure out is it plus or minus. So let's graph it. Let's find it on the quadrant, on the unit circle, you can draw a unit circle and plot the point plus 0.927 and negative 3/8 and minus negative 0.927 negative 3/8. One of them would be here, and one of them would be here, but we'll take the one that is instead in the third quadrant, which is right here. Oh, this is this goes with the decimal calculator keys right here. This unit circle is actually plotting these points and just give you a visual for where they are. You can see the tangent of 1.74 has a slope of 1.74, this line right here. The hypotenuse connecting the, yeah. All right, anyway, talked long enough. Copy the problem list, start 63, and I'll see you in class. After I tell you about my trip to Bryce Canyon, oh my gosh, it was terrible. My friends that were hosting us ignored us. The friends that actually hiked with us the day trip was they were having terrible relationship problems that they were like fighting it out in the middle of the trip while we were on the hike. It was the most beautiful hike I've ever been at, and my friends just treated us like it was just not. I just wish we were done it by ourselves, not with our friends. It would have been awesome. Have you been to Bryce Canyon? The hoodoos are crazy. I'll see you in class.